Early each morning, thousands of different transit vehicles start up in order to begin another day of moving our people wherever they need to go. For a number of reasons, these systems are each very important to the success of our cities. But this video is not about the environment or the economy. Instead, this video aims to find the reasoning why public transit is not nearly as successful in America as it is in other industrialized nations. For most of us, the only experience we have with transit is the school bus during our K-12 schooling. Many of us might not know what transit is available to us now, and since we haven't used it, we certainly wouldn't know why it isn't working. In order to establish the importance of public transit for those of us in the Houghton-Hancock area, imagine how useful the system would be should your car ever break down, or you need a ride to the repair shop, or you simply don't want to find a parking space on campus in the middle of the day. Hundreds of people already use these services, whether they choose not to drive or they don't own a car. Doing so, you can flag down a bus anywhere along an established route, you can get on an established bus stop, or you can have a bus come directly to your house for you. It's important to improve these services so that you might prefer to use them rather than driving, and only then can the economic and environmental benefits occur from public transit. The very first search results on these topics revealed blogs and forums that provided an opinion for why people did not use transit. These opinions cited inconvenience and cost. In terms of convenience, though riders would sometimes appreciate the savings in money for using transit, they still use their personal automobile for the sake of having flexibility and being able to react to situations that would otherwise be compromised by a rigid transit schedule. The cost of transit systems was also labeled by a number of other writers as being too prohibitive because, for all the costs involved, only 2% of all trips in America are made on public transit. One publication from the Foundation for Economic Education by H. Nathan Hart and Paul Cleveland, called The Smart Growth Scam, it went so far as to paint the transit as an attack on individual liberties. When policies are made to put transit use at an advantage over the use of a personal vehicle, such as Denmark's 180% tax that exists on some cars, the Foundation interprets these actions as a restriction on their right to choose their travel lifestyle. Two writers from the American Public Transportation Association concur that an anti-transit and conservative point of view is that publicly funded transit systems are an artificial, government-created industry that would not otherwise exist in a completely free market. This is where lots of the opposition for transit comes from in the government. In their article, Does Transit Work? A Conservative Reappraisal, however, they quickly refute this point of view by reminding us that the interstate highway system which facilitates our free market automobiles was also created artificially by the government and as early as World War I. This APTA article turned out to be a wonderful starting point because it is somewhat pro-transit despite the fact that conservatives are generally those who do not prefer to use government funds for failing transit projects. The article quotes from many federal studies and journal articles confirming that, regardless of the 148% increase of operating subsidies for transit between 1980 and 1990, ridership has, in terms of passenger miles traveled, fell from 1.43% of the nation's total to 1.27% in those same years. In the era surrounding World War II, transit was used for 23 million annual trips, but has dwindled to 8 million annual trips in recent years. Reports in the Journal of Transportation and Statistics, published by the U.S. Department of Transportation's Bureau of Transportation Statistics, indicate surveys that also show such declines. These reports go on to say that auto vehicle miles of travel are converted into person miles of travel by factoring vehicle miles of travel by vehicle occupancy. I'm sure I've lost you at this point, and quite frankly, the reports had lost me too. I decided that the reports were no longer useful, and I moved on to conducting personal surveys to gather information. Two students that I surveyed were not originally from the United States. They grew up in large cities in Sri Lanka and Nigeria, and indicated that their transit use was very frequent because it was impractical and very expensive to own a car in those areas. Two people that I surveyed from within the United States, though, grew up in suburban Metro Detroit and had not used transit very frequently at all because the transit service was not readily available, but also inconvenient, and often took longer than bicycling or driving there themselves. These survey results suggest a strong correlation between population densities and the success of the local transit programs. Many transit trade publications, notably the Journal of Urban Planning and Development, among others, suggest population densities largely affect the practicality of public transit. Considering the landscape we see now, Michigan Tech's surroundings, like other smaller communities, are certainly not an environment in which a standard plan for transit could thrive. This situation is common throughout the United States, where lower densities in the suburbs and rural areas are considered desirable. The automobile with a sophisticated highway system makes this possible by enabling a far-reaching commute. Also found in this investigation is that funding is a key issue to making transit work. One argument that is common regarding the continual push to slash public transit funding because of their lack of profitability is flawed in that highways for private vehicles do not make any profits either. A speech by James Costin in Philadelphia in December of 2001 specifically compares passenger rail transit to the airline industry, which is rarely profitable, and also to the highways, which have no way of generating income. A major argument that Mr. Costin makes later in his speech is that transit systems have not been tried in modern America. This is probably an argument that could be challenged by those who reluctantly funded examples of modern but failed transit systems, but the average American could probably concur with Costin's argument in that the airline industry is the only popular mode for traveling coast to coast in the United States. Specifically considering rail, the levels of service that were available during the heyday of passenger rail travel, like we see in the footage behind this, have not been used for more than 30 years. The market and profitability of these methods of travel is unknown because they have not been used with modern settings and equipment and at a fair price. I was fortunate to receive an interview with Miss Jody Reynolds of the Houghton Motor Transit, the director of our local transit system. When asked if the department was properly funded, she quickly said no, and described how money is lost in each ride. In my own scenario, we can consider a maximum fare of $6 for an adult traveling by bus outside the city limits. The cost of fuel for a 2-mile trip at 6.5 miles per gallon, with the average price of diesel fuel being $3.06, would already exceed the fare paid by the passenger, yet to be added to the cost of running the bus is the driver's wages, the insurance, and the maintenance. 6 years ago, 50% of the funding for this service came from the state of Michigan. The current level from the state, however, exists at 38%, and 16% comes from the federal government. My interview with Miss Reynolds was so informative that I could have created a whole nother YouTube video on everything she told me. What I can pass on to you is that the funding involved with the transit lines is so bureaucratic that it is largely out of our hands to make any changes. What we can do, and what I propose that this topic is chosen for a final presentation, is create some sort of awareness campaign to spread the word about what services are available to us. Spreading the word effectively about their services would likely increase ridership, and that would increase the amount of funding the city transit line can receive. And in turn, since funding and population levels are largely out of our hands, I believe that the spread awareness of transit and its services would be most effective for us on a local level to make transit more successful in America. Thank you for watching.